Now that we've gone through a few scenarios to show you what the 3 different observations should look like, let's get into the specifics of what you should be looking for with regards to the right and wrong way to do each of the operating practices listed on the observation checklist that are points of concern and are open to interpretation. Some, like is the operator wearing a seatbelt, are pretty straightforward and won't be discussed. The Practical Skills Observation Form has 3 distinct categories of observation criteria, with 26 operating practices that must be observed. The 3 categories include pre-use inspection, general operation and travel, and finally parking. Now let's go review each one to see what right and wrong looks like. Category 1 speaks to the operating practices related to the pre-use inspection. During the observation, you must observe the following. Is the operator wearing CSA-approved footwear and a high visibility vest? Is the vest corporate issue? Do the shoes enclose the feet? Remember, toe caps are not to be used to operate MMHE. They are a temporary measure for visitors only. Did the operator complete a pre-use inspection of the equipment? Did the operator inspect the battery compartment? Did the operator walk around the equipment to make sure nothing is defective before turning it on? Did the operator cycle through each controller test functionality? Did the operator complete and submit a checklist and defect report at the start of the shift? Now let's look at Category 2. Category 2 speaks to the operating practices related to the general operation and travel of MMHE. During the observation, you must observe the following. The forklift operator must get off and on the forklift facing the unit, holding onto the grab handle mounted to the overhead guard in the seat. The operator should never dismount facing forward as they can slip, fall, and injure themselves. Notice here how the operator has a firm grip on the handle and the seat and plants both feet before releasing. Getting back on the machine, the same applies. Face the machine, grab onto the handle and the seat, get in, plant your feet, release, and proceed. Now let's have a look as this operator does it the wrong way. He faces away from a unit, jumps out, doesn't have a firm footing, walks over the forks, and uses one hand to get back in. Totally dangerous situation, and serious injury can result. It is equally important that the stacker operator gets on and off the stacker in the same way, holding onto the tiller and the handrail. The stacker operator should never jump off of the stacker, especially when it is in motion. They can trip and fall, or the stacker can hit the operator's legs or run over their feet, causing serious injury to themselves. Wait for the unit to stop and use 3 points of contact to dismount. Notice here how the operator has a firm grip of the tiller and the handrail before stepping back onto the machine. Now let's have a look at this operator as he approaches with only one hand on tiller. He can be thrown from the machine at any time if this machine was to come to a sudden and abrupt stop. Jumps off the machine without being stopped, gets back on the machine while it's in motion, totally off balance. He can fall, hurt himself at any time. It's important that the operator look in the direction of travel to avoid colliding with other operators, pedestrians, or fixed objects. The operator must avoid focusing on the load only or other distractions and focus on the direction of travel. The operator must set the load to the desired height and look in the direction of travel when backing out with the load, so as to make sure the way is clear. Notice here how the operator is a quick look behind, returns his focus to the load, and backs out, failing to see the pedestrian walking past him. Many serious incidents at Canada Post have occurred as a result of this behavior. Set the load correctly and look where you are going. The load will let you know if it's not set correctly. You will feel it bind or screech, but you won't hear that pedestrian or other MMHE coming up behind you, and a serious collision can occur. Set the load and look in the direction as you pull out. It's important that operators maintain 3 points of contact at all times when traveling with MMHE. The stacker operator must hold on to the tiller and handrail when in motion to avoid being thrown from the machine if for some reason it comes to a sudden stop. Forklift operators must avoid putting their hands on the overhead guard when backing to avoid getting their hands crushed or amputated if they were to collide with a fixed object. The operator travels on the LR7 with a hand on the tiller, the other hand on the handrail, with both feet firmly planted on the platform. The operator travels on the LR7 with one hand on the tiller and one hand by their side. The operator travels backwards with one hand on the steering wheel, one hand on the mast controls, or with an elbow on the seat backrest with both feet on the floor of the cab. The operator travels backwards with one hand on the steering wheel and one hand on the overhead guard. It's important that operators keep all limbs inside the operator's compartment while it is in motion. The operator has both feet firmly planted on the platform, comes to a complete stop and gets off the unit to look at the tag, gets back on the unit and continues on his way. This operator's foot is hanging off of the platform as he holds onto the tiller and hangs off the platform to look at the tag. LR7 operators must keep their feet inside the edge of the platform and their body centered at all times to avoid falling from the machine or getting their foot amputated should they collide with a fixed object or another MMHE. For the forklift, the operator comes to a complete stop, sets the parking brake, and gets off the unit to look at the tag, gets back on the unit, and continues on his way. This operator hangs over the side of the unit to look at the tag. Forklift operators must avoid leading their heads out past the overhead guard or reaching through the mast assembly. The unit can creep forward and amputate the operator's head, or the mast can drop and amputate a limb. If operators cannot see past the load without leaning, they must call for a spotter or get off the machine and have a look. When picking a load, the operator must choose the proper lane position and look back to verify tail swing. Proper lane positioning is key to successfully negotiating turns with MMHE. If the operator does not properly position the forklift before making the turn, the back end of the MMHE can collide with other MMHE, a pedestrian, or a fixed object. It is important that the operator stay as close as possible to the load when making the turn. In this case, the operator sets himself up in the wrong position because he lines up too far from the load. He then fails to verify his tail swing to make sure the way is clear behind the unit and collides with the stage mono. The back of the forklift and/or stacker swing out when turning with forks leading. It's important that the operator take the proper lane position to account for tail swing and avoid making contact with a fixed object or other MMHE as it swings out. When done correctly, the operator picks up the load, backs out, comes to a complete stop, and lowers the load to the proper travel position before moving on. It's important that the operator lower the load to the proper travel height before putting the unit in motion. The operator must not travel or turn with the load elevated, as the lift is less stable with an elevated load and can tip during a turn or sudden stop. In this case, the operator picks the load, backs, turns, and lowers the load while the unit is in motion and fails to set the load to the proper travel position before moving on. The operator in this case is actually traveling with an elevated load. He should have come to a complete stop, lowered the load completely onto the support arms before setting them to initial lift and moving on. Also, traveling with an elevated load obstructs the operator's view, and a collision with a fixed object, other MMHE, or pedestrians can occur. And, in the case of a counterbalance forklift traveling with an elevated load, the unit can actually tip forward if the operator stops suddenly, causing the load to fall off the forks. When done correctly, the operator picks the load, backs out, stops, and lowers the load to the proper travel position before moving on. It's important that the load be set to traveling position before putting the unit in motion, as the two should not be done simultaneously. The hydraulics should only be used when the unit is stopped and service brakes are applied. This will ensure that the forklift remains stable while in motion and the operator's view is not obstructed. In this case, the operator picks and lowers the load while the unit is in motion and turning. The unit is therefore unbalanced and the operator's view is obstructed. Lifting and lowering the load while in motion is also a distraction to the operator, causing the operator to focus on the load rather than looking in the direction of travel. When done correctly, the operator fully inserts the forks so that the mono is resting against the backrest before picking the load and moving it, whether it be a single mono or a stack of monos. On a counterbalanced forklift, the load must also be nested by tilting the mast back. Doing so ensures that the load is stable on the forks and that the proper load center distance is achieved. In this case, the operator fails to fully engage the load so that the mono is against the backrest, causing the load to be unstable on the forks. Not fully engaging the load so that it rests against the backrest actually increases the load center distance, lowering the lift capacity of the forklift. Not nesting the load can cause the bottom of the top mono to catch on the top of the bottom mono, pulling the mono off of the forks when the operator backs out. When picking with a stacker, you can't nest the load, so be sure to lift the load high enough to compensate for mast flex so that the top mono doesn't catch the bottom one and get pulled off the forks when the operator backs out. Also, it's important that when stacking two monos, that the heavier mono be on the bottom of the stack. A top heavy load can tip in a turn or collapse the bottom mono. When done correctly, the operator lines up the top mono with the bottom one, lifts, places the mono carefully over the bottom one, and lowers it back in place, making sure that all corners are seated. A visual inspection of the corners and latches is recommended to make sure that the top mono is properly seated and latched so that it doesn't shift or collapse in transit. The operator then pulls out of the load, lowers the forks onto the support arms, re-engages the load, sets the support arms to initial lift, and moves on. In this case, the operator does not take the time to properly line up the top mono with the bottom one and places it recklessly on top. In not lining up correctly with the bottom mono, the operator has a difficult time stacking the two and fails to seat the top mono on the bottom one properly. Once he manages to set one on top of the other, he fails to notice that one of the corners is not seated because he did not do his visual inspection. He then pulls away with an unstable and unsecured load that could tip, topple, or collapse in transit. So there you have it. Regularly observing MMHE operators to make sure they are operating safely and competently and taking immediate action when they are not will go a long way to improving MMHE safety and making sure everyone makes it home safe and sound. Assess each situation on an individual basis and determine what solution is best. Some situation may call for simple discussion with the employee. Others may require a more complex solution that includes corrective training and perhaps progressive discipline. Regardless of the complexity of the situation, do not hesitate to reach out to the applicable stakeholders and SMEs for support in making the call. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, make it safe, make it home. Thank you.